When it comes to Hollywood, regardless of whether we're talking about movies or TV series, not everything is going to be a massive hit. Sure, everyone wants it to be that way, but it's not going to be that way. There are movies that should have been hits but turned out to be massive flops. There are series that are incredibly high quality, but sometimes don't make it past one season or even two if they're lucky. Yet over time, as people see other productions and then come back to these underrated gems, we start to realize that just because they were flops on the big screen or canceled on the small one, they still have plenty of value. In the 1960s, there were multiple films that fit this category, so let us show you them. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. 6. King Rat. If we were to tell you that King Rat was a World War II film, you might easily think that we're going to tell you about a key part of the war where certain hero soldiers had to go and complete an objective against all odds, and there are many losses along the way, but it all saved the war effort in the end. After all, that's what many war movies are about. Except King Rat wasn't like that at all. It was about a group of soldiers who were trapped in a Japanese POW camp. The main character was someone who wasn't afraid to scam his fellow prisoner, and each one of the men there did whatever they could to survive the bleak and terrifying experience. If that sounds depressing, it's because it was designed that way. It was actually based on a semi-biographical book, and the whole point is that war isn't always heroic, and not everyone in it acts like a good person when put in bad situations. One of the ironies of this was that one of the main actors actually was a POW in the war, and brought a rawness to the film that was so strong that even the director had a hard time making the film. Think about that. So why did it flop? A few reasons. 1. A lot of people weren't interested in the realism because the romance of the war, long since over at this point, was still on their minds. The idea that soldiers were just humans instead of noble soldiers first and foremost wasn't appealing to them. Second, due to the gritty tone and story, many weren't sure how to market the film. As such, they just generalized, which made viewers mad when they learned the truth. Thus, the movie flopped, and in some countries was actually banned because of how it portrayed some of the officers from other countries. Thankfully, over time, the film did get a resurgence, mainly because they understood that this was as real of a war film that they could get without it being about massive fights and explosions happening everywhere. War is messy and it breaks people, and King Rat wasn't afraid to show that. 5. The Train. We're going to show you another war movie right now, but it's one with one heck of a twist. The reason for that is that while King Rat could definitely be made today, especially in a world where more character-driven pieces are appreciated, The Train could quite literally never be made today, not even if Tom Cruise starred in it. The plot of the movie is actually rather simple. It's set in World War II, where Burt Lancaster played a French resistance fighter who had a key mission: stop the German forces from stealing priceless art. That art was being taken on a train, so he had to stop him at all costs. The twist in this tale came in the action and filmmaking. You see, both then and now, movies weren't afraid to take shortcuts to try and save money and make things seem real, but they weren't. In contrast, Burt Lancaster put everything on the line, literally, to make this movie as real as possible. That included blowing up real trains and train tracks. Everything in this film is 100% genuine, even the bullets that were fired on set. Yeah, you couldn't get away with this today for safety reasons alone. Plus, if you failed just one stunt, think of the cost of redoing it. In many ways, the movie was a cinematic spectacle that is a sight to behold. But because it was released in a period where a lot of action-style war movies were being made, many didn't see its appeal. It didn't help that because of Lancaster strong-arming multiple parts of the production and doing all his own stunts, the production time got extended and the budget grew and grew in the worst way. Still, it wanted an example of filmmaking at its realest. This is as close as you'll get. And no, Tom Cruise, you really can't try to remake this film. We know you can do your own stunts. Just take a back seat for a while, okay? The Sand Pebbles. We'll put a caveat for this one because while the initial release of The Sand Pebbles didn't do well, it was a film that had long legs, if you will, and it helped that a shorter version of the film came out later on. However, what really set this film up for near disastrous results wasn't the cast and crew, but their location. They tried filming the whole wartime nighttime political thriller in Taiwan during monsoon season. Yeah, that wasn't a good idea. And due to that decision, a lot of the cast got sick. That obviously held things up quite well. There was one cast problem that needs to be mentioned, though, and it's another that has a caveat attached to it. The star of the movie was Steve McQueen, and he was so good in his role that he got an Oscar nomination. Adding to that irony was that this film was his only Oscar nomination. Go figure. The problem was that he went full method actor on this one, and that meant he was clashing with the director throughout production. Many also weren't sure of what the film's tone or message was, and that confused audiences and critics alike. Yes, it did get nominated for awards, but not many saw it as truly award-worthy, which is something that everyone can relate to with certain award winners. Anyway, the film did eventually make a profit, but it took a while, and many likely thought it'd be an instant hit due to McQueen alone. 3. Play Dirty. If you thought King Rat was a brutal look at war, Play Dirty was arguably even rougher, and that, again, was the intention. The movie starred the legendary Michael Caine, who was tasked with leading a group of commandos through North Africa to blow up a key oil depot. Sounds simple, right? Except the movie was a very nihilistic view of war, which is honestly fair for what war is at its core. The soldiers, including Caine's, were portrayed as heroic, but men who were trying to complete a mission, get some payback on Germany, and get back alive. Many didn't appreciate how anti-war it was, but that didn't stop legends like Martin Scorsese for calling it out as one of the great pieces of its time. Remember, back then, people were still riding high on certain global victories. It wasn't until a little bit later that anti-war sentiment started rising up all over the world. So in many ways, Play Dirty was ahead of its time. Plus, as we all know now from more recent wars, there are absolutely cases of soldiers who have dealt low blows just to get the job done in their minds. 2. The Swimmer. Okay, let's get away from the military productions, okay? Let's take a look at The Swimmer. This one also starred Burt Lancaster, but it was one that had an arguably grim plot that was lost on most viewers. It was all about a man who decided that he needed to go and swim in every single swimming pool in his neighbor. What might have started out as a kinky notion quickly became a descent into madness, as the main character kept trying to live out his dream, even though things were going clearly wrong around him. It's honestly even hard for us to describe this film, so now imagine what it must have been like to watch this film back in the 1960s. The movie was a flop because people truly didn't know what to make of it. Yet that's also what made it a cult classic in many respects. Many appreciated the weirdness of it all, and Burt Lancaster absolutely brought it despite the unusual setting and plot. Ironically, lots of these kinds of weird films are made today, but back then it wasn't as common, and that's likely why it flopped. 1. Cleopatra. In all honesty, there was no other film from the 1960s that we could put on this list. Not only was this film a flop, it remains a very clear reminder of what will happen if you go too big on a film just because you think it's a guaranteed hit. Something that many film studios today are still learning in some respects. Right, Marvel Cinematic Universe? Anyway, the film is exactly what you think it is. It was a film dedicated to the life of Cleopatra, the legendary queen of Egypt, who is still revered to this day for her talents and alleged beauty. To help harp home that final point, she was played by the legendary Elizabeth Taylor in the peak of her fame. Naturally, studios felt that her star power would bring many to the film, but the film was a disaster behind the scenes. First and foremost, it was supposed to be a modest biofilm on Cleopatra, but then it blossomed into a picture that would have cost over $400 million today with inflation. Due to the large-scale productions, many of which had to be redone multiple times, the costs boomed. It didn't help that directors kept getting fired. Elizabeth Taylor almost died on set, and as if that all wasn't enough, Taylor had an affair with one of her co-stars, and that put the movie in a truly scandalous light. The film bombed so hard, it destroyed a studio and almost killed 20th Century Fox where it stood. Sure, when you look at it through an objective lens, you can see why it's somewhat revered today due to how big Hollywood made it, but there is a line that shouldn't cross, and Hollywood literally paid the price for it. Now, do you want to hear the truly ironic part of this movie? That would be that this movie is getting made once again. That's right, it's getting a modern remake with Gal Gadot being cast as Cleopatra. You might recall her as Wonder Woman from the DCEU. The problems with this are numerous, not the least of which is that Gadot's casting has caused all sorts of controversy within certain circles. The real problem, though, is that just like the original, it's already having lots of production problems, not the least of which is that the film film was announced in 2025, and it hasn't even started production as far as we can tell. We guess Hollywood never truly learns its lessons, does it? That question, does Hollywood ever truly learn its lessons, is one that echoes far beyond the 1960s. Because when you look at these films, you start to notice a pattern. These weren't all bad movies. In fact, most of them weren't bad at all. Some were bold, some were visionary, some were just ahead of their time. But all of them were mishandled, misunderstood, or misjudged when they hit theaters. And when that happens, it doesn't matter how talented the cast was or how powerful the message might have been. The audience didn't respond, and the studios moved on. But now, decades later, we are responding. We're rewatching, reanalyzing, and reappraising these forgotten or failed films and seeing them for what they really were, misfits in a time that didn't know what to do with them. And that's the beauty of hindsight. It allows us to remove the noise of opening weekends, critical expectations, and marketing hype. It lets us look at these projects as complete works, not just as numbers on a box office report. In doing so, we often find that these so-called flops have more to say, more to show, and more to teach us than some of the blockbusters that dominated their era. Take The Swimmer, for example. It was too abstract, too surreal for audiences in the late 60s. But today, it's a compelling character study that reflects the emptiness of upper-class suburbia, a theme that resonates even more now. Or Play Dirty, with its unfiltered view of war and morality. That's not just entertainment, that's commentary. And King Rat? It dared to tell the truth about the ugliness of survival in POW camps without romanticizing the experience. These are not failures, they are time capsules waiting to be opened. It's also worth acknowledging how the 1960s was a decade of tension in the film industry. The traditional studio system was slowly unraveling, and new voices were starting to emerge. Audiences were no longer satisfied with glossy epics or neatly packaged happy endings. The Vietnam War, civil rights movements, and cultural revolutions were reshaping how people thought about the world, and that began to reflect in film, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes subtly, and sometimes explosively. Many of the movies on this list tried to bridge the gap between the old and the new. Some leaned into realism, others dove into artistic risk-taking. A few simply asked deeper questions than audiences were used to. But the reality of box office economics didn't allow much room for experimentation. If you didn't perform immediately, you were labeled a failure, no matter the quality. And yet, that's what makes these films so interesting now, because the culture has caught up. We now crave nuance in war films. We expect surrealism in indie dramas. We celebrate practical effects and stunt work, like what Burt Lancaster did in The Train. Today's audiences are more open to films that defy convention. We're less focused on neat endings and more drawn to the journey itself. This evolution in taste is why movies like Cleopatra continue to fascinate us. It's not just about how much money it lost or how chaotic the production was. It's about how far a studio was willing to go to craft a cinematic monument. It was a cautionary tale then, and it still is now, but for all its excess and drama, it was ambitious. It swung for the fences. And honestly, that kind of boldness, even when it fails, deserves recognition. It also highlights how much the business of Hollywood can affect the art of filmmaking. Marketing failures, studio interference, casting controversies, and even the release date can all doom a film before it has a chance to speak for itself. And sometimes, great performances, like Steve McQueen's in The Sand Pebbles, get lost in the noise. That's why these retrospectives matter. They remind us that a movie's worth isn't dictated solely by critics, ticket sales, or the decade it was made in. Some stories need time to be appreciated. Some messages hit harder after years of cultural shifts. Some performances gain weight when viewed through the lens of history. And some flops? Well, they end up being prophetic in ways no one could have predicted at the time. So maybe Hollywood doesn't always learn its lessons, but we do. We learn to look back with fresh eyes. We learn not to judge a film solely by its reception, but by what it tried to say and how it tried to say it. We learn that just because something didn't land the first time doesn't mean it wasn't worth making. If anything, this look back at the 1960s shows us how fragile success really is in the world of film. A movie can have all the talent, vision, and resources in the world and still miss its mark. But that doesn't erase its value. It just means it was waiting for the right audience, maybe an audience like us today. So if you're ever scrolling through a list of older films and you see one of these titles, King Rat, The Swimmer, The Sand Pebbles, Play Dirty, and yes, even Cleopatra, don't skip over it, because someone once said it was a flop. Watch it. Let it speak for itself, because sometimes, buried under decades of dust and dismissal, lies a story that deserves a second chance. chance. And that's all from the decade of the 1960s and the movies of that period that were definitely better than some people gave them credit for. Had you ever watched some of these movies before? Which ones do you feel were the best of the list, and which ones do you now need to go watch? Or do you know of other 1960s films that should have been on our list so they can be given a second chance by a modern audience? Let us know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you next time on the channel.